Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the webinar, which is we're going to be obviously looking into unsupported software. I'm Chris Booth from ITHealth. Most of you will have spoken to me or heard of ITHealth at some point in the past few years, I'm sure. But as a very brief intro, we've been working with NHS cyber and IT security now for nearly 30 years. And we are very closely aligned with Sophos, as most of you will probably know. And yeah, we want to have a really good deep look at how we can help you support some of these operating systems that maybe cause you some pain. So I've got two colleagues on with me today from Sophos, Dan and Andy, and I'm going to hand over to Dan in a second, and I'm sure they'll do their own intros. There are people still joining us, so we will get on and try and keep to time. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Anybody has any questions, if you could put them into the questions box, which you should see on your panel, that'd be wonderful, thank you, and we'll deal with those at the end. And also at the end, and I will remind everybody, there's a short survey which will help us kind of continue to get these webinars to your liking and improve where we can. So anyway, without wasting any more time, I'll hand over to Dan and Andy. Thanks, gents.
Brilliant. Well, thanks everyone for joining today's webinar. As discussed, today we'll be going through protecting unsupported operating systems and adopting a multi-layered cyber security platform. Today I'll be joined by my colleague Andy.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm Andy. I'll be guiding you through the bulk of the presentation today. I've been at Sophos for very nearly 14 years now, of which I've spent 7 years in tech support as a malware removal specialist, and I've done the last 7 years in sales engineering, doing all the architect and technical training and enablement things as well. The first thing you need to know about me really is that I am a massive Linux nerd. Not massive in size, but massive in love of Linux. And I'm running it on Linux here today and everything. It's a beautiful operating system, and I'd highly recommend using it. I do take my IT security seriously, just as seriously as I take my physical security. And I'm actually a second degree black belt in a career in martial arts, which keeps me busy and fit, especially in these lockdown times. When I'm not doing that, I'm usually dealing with my horde of children. I have hundreds of them that run around and make a lot of noise. Thankfully, they're all at school today, so you shouldn't hear too many of them in the background. And when they're in bed, I like to unwind by playing some computer games in an evening, which is especially good during the lockdown periods because it seems to be socially acceptable once more, which is nice. And so with me today, we have my colleague Dan, who will just talk about himself very quickly.
Perfect. So, hello, my name is Dan Goodfellow. I am a public sector account manager looking after London and the South East. I've been at Sophos now for just over a year. Before then, I have spent the last 7 years in the cyber security industry. Outside of work, I'm a keen hiker, both inside the UK and abroad, but under the current climate, it doesn't look like I'll be going abroad anytime soon. So my partner and I have decided to make the most of being at home and have got a 3-month-old Portuguese water dog. So that will be taking up the majority of my time over the coming years as we desperately try to train it. In terms of an introduction of Sophos, I've seen a number of the people who've joined today already have a number of our solutions. For those who don't, who are new to us, just as a bit of background, we were founded in Oxford in 1985, primarily as a endpoint security provider. Since then, we've grown out and now currently have 420,000 customers worldwide. Oh, sorry, 100 million users in 150 countries. And all of these customers rely on our threat intelligence, which is Sophos Labs. We offer a wide variety of different solutions, and the great thing about our central solution is all managed by one central point. So whether that's a firewall, it's wireless, it's email, it's web, it's encryption, mobile, server, or endpoint, all of our devices can be managed from one central point. This makes it easy for you to manage, control, and set up. And it also differentiates us from a lot of our competitors, as we're able to manage and communicate between products. So rather than having a brilliant solution as a firewall or a brilliant solution as an endpoint, they might be great at what they can do, but if they're not communicating with one another, threats will get through. By having synchronized security, which is having solutions which communicate with one another and share threat intelligence with one another, you reduce the attack threat on your network. Now, I won't go on about COVID too long, but I do understand in the current climate, a lot of organizations, particularly in the public sector, have had to change the way that they currently work, whether that's moving people from on-site to working from home, whether that's encountering a new working style, and whether that's changes needed from the management all the way down. So we do have a number of tools available to you. So I can happily send these links out afterwards, whether that's guidance from a CIO and CISOs on what they should be asking of their employees, whether that's best practice for remote working to make sure you and your company and your organization is safe and secure. And finally, just an update on the latest coronavirus scams that are currently being seen by our threat intelligence team at the moment. So hopefully that's just giving you a brief intro into Sophos. If you do have any questions or queries, more than happy to answer, but I will hand it over to my colleague, Andy.
Cool, thanks, Dan. Yeah, we'll get started and talk about, frankly, one of the biggest issues in IT security, especially within the NHS, but equally so in corporates and stuff as well. That issue, of course, is Microsoft Windows operating systems, or more precisely, I should say, not keeping my Linux hat on for too long, the unpatched, unsupported, unprotected versions of Windows. If you do the next slide, then. And the next one again, it's fine. So today we're going to be talking about two operating systems in particular. If you can do the next slide, Dan. Which is Windows 2008 and its R2 variant as well, and Windows 7. Although honestly speaking, the stuff we're going to be talking about today is going to be applicable to supported systems as well, because frankly, the security that you need to enforce on those in a best practice world at least should be across the board. Now, Windows 2008 was obviously released all the way back in 2008, as per the name, and Windows 7 was actually released in the following year after that. 2008 was based on the Longhorn kernel, which was actually the same one that powered that lovely Vista operating system. I don't know if powered is quite the right word for it, but there we are. 2008 R2, on the other hand, uses the same kernel as the Windows 7 OS. Now, both of those systems have obviously hit their retirement at the beginning of this year. There is the option for the extended security updates from Microsoft, although that is a paid license, and it's paid yearly as well. With that paid license, you can get maintenance and security updates up till 2023. So it's got a little bit of life left in it if you're willing to pay for it. And that only applies to the professional enterprise licenses, which I imagine in the trust and stuff, that's going to be the case anyway. If you aren't making use of the extended security updates, then Windows 2008, Windows 7 devices within your network are not going to be getting critical security updates from Microsoft. This frankly leaves the doors and the windows open to anyone able to abuse them. As a fact for you guys out there, then in the last year, Windows 7 had 250 reported vulnerabilities just in 2019. That is on average about 20 per month. And if you go back all the way in its entire life cycle, all the way back to 2009, then Windows 7 actually was averaging 116 vulnerabilities per year. So nearly 10 a month. It's quite considerable. The question to ask yourself really is it still secure today? 9 months without security updates. assuming you're not paying for the extended licenses? The obvious answer is no. So that takes us onto the problem. And I hope you all agree that running an unsupported, unprotected operating system is frankly a terrible idea. If you don't agree with that, then perhaps you're on the wrong webinar, and maybe there's some other ones you might want to go and watch instead. If anyone's still here after that, then hopefully we can learn together and figure out something that we can do to make these things better. Now, there's obviously various reasons out there that an old legacy operating system is still in use. Especially in trusts, items are going to be in constant use. Items that are controlling scanners and important medical software and systems out there. There's a constant flow of people obviously needing access to those 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It doesn't really stop. So interrupting those systems for maintenance updates and for major software updates obviously is never an easy thing to do. There are other cases, of course, where the software used on them is perhaps no longer in production. Maybe the company that was providing that software is no longer around. That then obviously leaves you in an awkward place where you've got hardware that you need to be able to manage that uses software that was maybe written a decade or more ago. And it just simply does not work on the latest operating systems. It doesn't work on Windows 10, even with compatibility mode or something like that's enabled. So perhaps the only option is to run something like Windows 7. Other devices maybe are just very long in the teeth and don't have the hardware resources capable of actually running the latest versions of Windows anymore. I'm sure we've all seen how Windows has grown in size and its minimum spec has jumped up obviously with every release. It does get bigger and bigger. Microsoft are obviously working on trying to make it smaller over time as well, but it certainly has grown even since the Windows 7 days. Now, avoiding any sort of political comments, there's obviously some financial issues within the NHS systems and trusts around here. And frankly, the ability to maybe upgrade some of those software licenses, maybe it's just completely out of budget. Maybe there's not enough budget to be able to upgrade those pieces of software, to run those scanners, to run those important systems out there. And finally, the biggest one right in the middle there, which is probably the most common one I imagine for a lot of trusts, is time. Time is always against us. It's always marching towards the end of supported security updates. There's only so many hours in a day that anyone can manage all of these machines and keep on top of them all. And it's a constant job, especially with the restrictive budgets. Yeah, that only makes things harder. Now, of course, there are many other problems and many other causes for maybe why an unsupported operating system needs to be kept alive or is being kept alive. I'm sure you've all got your own issues and challenges that you're having to face out there as well. Cheers, Dan. Next slide for me. Thanks. So we know we shouldn't do it. We know there's many reasons why we have to or maybe need to do it. The Data Security and Protection Toolkit from NHS Digital does outline some of the steps that you may need to do when you have to have those types of systems in your network. Now, there are at least 5 particular topics around this, which I've dug out of the DSPT. There are others as well that reference similar sort of things as well. So obviously do have a thorough read through this. It's a very useful document, very useful thing to have in your kit bag when dealing with unsupported, unpatchable, unprotectable systems. The general theme of it, though, is that if there is a unsupported, unpatchable, unprotected machine or software that is running on that machine, the general line is get rid of it if you can. If you can get rid of it, great, uninstall it. Upgrade it to the latest version, whatever you need to do to prevent that issue becoming a risk to the trust itself. The DSPT then goes on to say if you can't get rid of it, then really the best thing you need to do, next best thing you can do is to isolate that machine. Make sure it has limited connectivity to the network. You then, of course, need to assess the risk that it will still pose to the trust and to the other devices within that network. And obviously then you've got all the joy of documenting those sort of things as well. Next slide again, please, Dan. The DSPT does then go on to mention cyber attacks, ensuring that machines are protected from malware. Now, where that is not possible, you'll obviously need to plan and implement maybe your own mitigations to prevent an issue from actually occurring. And we're going to talk about some of those mitigations you can look at using as well in a moment or two. Now, any device that has an internet connection or maybe could have an internet connection, because you remember, even a fully network isolated PC could have a phone tethered to it and be connected to the internet that way. It's not unheard of in any stretch of the imagination. So if a machine is out there which is capable of connecting to an internet connection or to a network connection, it must be up to date. It must have the latest software, it must be patched, and it must be within vendor support. And as we've seen already, if you can't do that, then you need to start looking at other forms of mitigation to lock that machine down further. Thanks, Dan. Next one for me. Now, we hired a research house back in 2019, which seems like an awfully long time ago now, with the way the world has changed already. They did an independent query around 3,100 different IT decision makers out there, and this is a global survey. It involved 12 different countries out there, and it was a mixture of public sector, corporate and private, and military and stuff as well, ranging from pretty small organizations from sort of 100 all the way up to 5,000 users. Now, the survey itself asked lots of questions around what happened in an attack. Have you had an attack? Did you find out where it came from? All those types of probing things. They didn't know that we were asking them. They didn't know that Sophos was behind it. It was a completely vendor agnostic query going out to people running all sorts of different software, be it ourselves, be it another vendor. Now, of the 3,100 people that were surveyed, 68% of them confirmed that their businesses had been involved in a cyber attack. Now, of those 68%, 90% of those did already have up-to-date running security software installed and running on those devices. So even with functional vendor-supported software, frankly, some companies are still struggling to keep their machines safe. So one of the other questions that we asked was, how do they then become a victim? Of these 68% of people, how did you get hit? Now, most of them were able to track back the source of the infection, which is certainly a good thing. With at the bottom there, 26% of the attacks actually coming through email. Be that a phishing attack, be that an embedded invoice.docm with a macro in there or something. It's quite a common source of attack at the moment, especially. 24% of those surveyed said that the root cause actually came from an infected website that the users ended up browsing to. Now, that could be something like a watering hole attack, where maybe if you're an accountant or something, you go and infect a website that accountants would often use. So that then when those people come along to those types of websites, which are commonly used by that particular department within an organization, that they then become compromised and then can be exploited and then can be infected and everything else can trickle off from there. Now, it was found that 18% of the infections also were hit by vulnerabilities in software. So that could be the operating system itself, which, as we all know and we all felt back in 2017, the WannaCry, the NotPetya attacks with the Eternal Blue exploits running around, they were obviously a big problem at the time. The vulnerabilities out there are still there. We still see attacks hitting operating systems from vulnerabilities that were patched by Microsoft several years ago, or by other vendors as well. I shouldn't really just pick on poor Microsoft entirely for this webinar. A further 11% of people actually narrowed it down to external mediums. So this could be USB pens that were maybe dropped in a car park, and someone very kindly picked it up, plugged it in, trying to find maybe whose device it was. And others still were the victim of their router, their firewall being hacked. Actually, rather interestingly, if you do want to read up on the survey, it was actually most common in South America, that 23% of people or organizations out there are actually victims of their firewalls being breached and taken over. Now, the scariest thing in here is, of course, that 21% of people don't know where that problem came from, don't know how they got infected. Now, of course, if you don't know how you got infected, how are you going to prevent that from happening again? How can you stop it? If you don't know how it got in, whether it got in through the window, through the door, through the chimney, I don't know if it was Christmas time maybe. If you don't know where the holes are in your estate, how can you prevent something from happening again? Cool. Next slide, Dan. Thank you. So I guess before we dive in properly and thoroughly and all the way through, you need to ask yourself 3 very simple, although potentially very hard to answer, questions. And they are: what, where, and why. What machines do you have that are unsupported? What are their risks? What software do you need to be concerned with that's out there? Where on earth are those machines? Large trusts. There's frankly so many machines out there. Just keeping an eye on all of them, frankly, could be a waking nightmare for many people out there, I'm sure. There's all sorts of machines hidden on all sorts of floors in all sorts of weird and wonderful offices and surgeries and stuff out there. And then finally, why? Why are those machines needed? Why can't you get rid of them? Why is it still here? Hopefully, once you can answer those 3, hopefully not very simple questions, unfortunately, hopefully then you're in a better place to then start dealing with it. Because if you don't know what you're dealing with, you can't get started. And that's where that 21% of unknown attacks is a big problem for any organization. If you don't know where it's coming from, you can't fix it. Now, as I say, I'm not going to lie to you. Getting those answers is going to be a hard job. But once you have them, you're going to be in a much, much better place to start improving the security of your trust. After all, security in any business is a journey. It takes time, it takes effort, but you have to start somewhere. As the saying goes, the best time to plant an apple tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. If you get started now, then you're going to be safer in the long run. If you keep delaying, it's going to undo. Now, the DSPT already mentioned about isolating machines and cutting them off. And it mentioned about layers of security in there as well. The layered approach to security is, frankly, it's not something new. It's been around for a very long time, as shown in this very beautiful picture of a castle in Spain. The layers are what's going to save you. By having more and more layers, you're going to build up more and more protection, and those layers can be enacted at different times and can stop different types of threats. Physical layers are just as important as virtual layers or software layers. And to get the best protection out of everything, you need to be mixing those together. You need to have physical layers, you need to have virtual layers and software layers to make sure that you have the best possible stance for your networks out there. Next slide, please, Dan. Now, the NCSC had a lovely quote from back in 2018. It's a little while ago now, but it still certainly rings true. And it says, as there are no mitigations that are completely effective against malware infection, you should develop a defense in-depth strategy for your organization. This consists of multiple layers of defense with several mitigations at each layer. This will improve your resilience against malware without disturbing the productivity of your users. You'll also have multiple opportunities to detect malware and then stop it before it has potential to cause damage to your organization, accepting the fact that some will get through will help you plan for the day when an attack is successful and minimize the damage caused. These are very wise words from the NCSC. They have loads of really, really great resources on their website, and some webinars and stuff as well that's definitely worth looking at. They're very agnostic around the type of security you use or the form of security you use, but they do prescribe the best way of doing it. And here, as it's mentioning, the layers of security is what's going to help you. It also mentions at the bottom there that you should plan for the day when an attack is successful, because by planning you have a strategy so that if something does go wrong, you know what to do. You're not panicking. You're not running around like a headless chicken. You can drill down. You can start getting on with it and prevent a small issue becoming a major issue. Thanks, Dan. So with that in mind, look at separation very quickly. As per the DSPT recommendations, securing systems that cannot be patched or cannot be fully secured with software, the best solution really is to isolate them from your estate. There are, of course, loads of different ways of doing this, each with their own risks, their own rewards. It's up to you what systems you've already got, what tools you've already got within your network, within your estate that can help you achieve this. The devices that cannot be virtually secured should really be removed from the network. Those that can maybe still obtain AV updates, like Windows 7, for example, in our case, we are supporting Windows 7 for quite some time still, several years yet. But maybe if you can't get the Windows updates, like again Windows 7, you are still going to need a connection, a network connection, an internet connection, in order for you to obtain those AV updates. Placing those devices, therefore, into maybe a separate VLAN or a separate subnet will reduce the risk that they pose to the rest of the business. Of course, as a word of warning, don't put all of your unsecurable, unprotectable, potentially vulnerable machines into one rather large network on their own, because frankly, they're going to start spreading malware to each other, and you're going to be just in a world of pain, frankly. Ideally, use things like client isolation at the switch level to prevent the items talking to each other, so that they can only ever talk upwards. Have very restrictive firewall rules preventing them from communicating to other networks, and maybe even to the internet. Stop all that communication other than what is absolutely necessary for maybe the AV updates or any other software updates that may be required on that particular device. There's also the option, of course, for physical separation with air gaps. It's commonly used really in the military and large infrastructure, but still important pretty much in any business. Having a physical separation can also help to slow or prevent the spread of malware within those networks. It does, of course, come with its own problems. How do you go about updating those systems? Next slide, please, Tim. Thanks. So that leads us to the kill switches. Really, the more layers that you have within your network, the more layers you can use to separate those devices, the easier it's going to be to use a kill switch on the affected areas in the event of an incident. Someone very high up and important once said that. Think of yourselves in the long run. The more controls you have in place now, if something does happen, the easier it will be, the quicker it will be, the less painful it will be for you to deal with if something does go wrong. Next slide, then. Now, pretty much every operating system out there has controls that are already built into them for yourself, for administrators to work with. You can define further restrictions that can really help to cut those machines down, to limit their threat surface area, to put layers in to make it harder for the threat actors to compromise those systems. The easy one, the obvious one straight out of the bat is the host-based firewalls. Windows Firewall comes with a pretty good firewall on Windows 7 and above. That includes the servers as well. Do not forget about the servers. Installing, employing, configuring, doing it right on the Windows firewall, on Windows 7, on Windows servers is very important. Make sure you configure it properly though. Make sure you are restricting both inbound and outbound traffic. The default, of course, for Windows is that it allows all outbound traffic, but blocks inbound traffic. Don't make that mistake. Do it properly, especially so for these unprotected, uncontrollable machines. Having those extra layers in there to prevent any traffic going out of those machines that shouldn't be going out can make a big difference. Secondly, device encryption. Again, anything from Windows 7 Enterprise and above has the option for device encryption on it. That can add an extra layer to protect any data that may reside on those systems. If those systems are stolen, or maybe they're decommissioned, but maybe not decommissioned properly, making sure that they're encrypted to a good standard, AES-256 ideally, that's going to make sure that the data that they may hold on there, because it only needs to be transient data in the temp folder or something like that, that data needs to be kept safe. Other features like Secure Boot, we'll see about that again in a minute, are again a great thing to have enabled, assuming your system supports it. Having Safe Boot turned on or Secure Boot turned on is going to prevent unsigned, unauthorized modules or drivers loading when the operating system boots. That is, during the boot process, it's frankly the most fragile part of the Windows operating system. When it's booting up, not all of the protection layers are enabled on those systems. And so that is when a lot of malware writers and everything else try to target that particular part, because frankly, they can get away with it. The systems are less protected, less secure, and obviously even more so if it's unpatched or unpatchable. The fourth item here, putting in application control. Again, Windows comes with its own built-in application control, although there are other systems that can be used in a much more friendly and easy to manage way. Part of that, you can prevent any unauthorized, unknown applications from running. That way you can stop maybe unpatchable software from being executed, software that maybe hasn't been updated for a long time. Maybe you've got a really old copy of FileZilla installed or something. With application control, you can prevent that from running, prevent that from being another attack vector that the threat actors can use to compromise that machine and take ownership of it. Next up, we have group policy. I'm sure you're all hideously bored with using group policy on a day-to-day basis, but it's a really, really powerful tool. It has so many features in there that you can use to really lock down, really harden those systems. Now, this goes just as much for those unprotectable, uncontrollable machines that are out there as it does for the proper protected machines. Your Windows 7s, your 2019 servers, your Windows 10s, 2019 servers. It's just as important for those as it is for the unprotected. Make good use of it. In fact, actually, the NCSC have some lovely templates on their website, which are a great starting point for making sure you've got a secure policy in place from the off. So I would highly recommend that you go to their website after this call, after this webinar, have a look at their stuff in there. They do have some very useful resources to help you have a better security stance. And the final one on here is event collection. Harking back again to information, the more you know about an attack, the more you can do to prevent it from happening again. Again, that 21% of unknowns that we saw with that survey, that just preaches about the issue that's out there. Make sure you've got event collection turned on, audit tracking for accounts, logons, failures, all that sort of stuff, to make sure that you have the right information. Because if you don't have the logging turned on the first time, when something happens, you have nothing to fall back on. You have none of that forensic information to help you find out what's wrong and to prevent that mistake or that issue from happening again. Cool, Dan. Next slide for me. And then finally, we have general best practices. Frankly, don't overlook them. The simple things are often the easiest things to forget about, but have the biggest effect. Make sure you subscribe to and use the principle of least privileges. Make sure that people only have the rights to do what they should have, that you've got password security and password policies in place that have the right level of protection that you expect. Make sure that these rules apply to everyone and everything. From my time in tech support, I've seen time and time again where it's literally just 1 or 2 machines that have caused a massive issue within customer environments. 1 or 2 unprotected machines, 1 or 2 unpatched servers, 1 or 2 user accounts with really dodgy passwords. That's all it takes to make a much, much larger issue occur. And then finally, plan for disaster. Know that it's going to happen. Don't think about if, think about when. When it's going to happen. It will happen. Make sure you're prepared for when it does happen, because it's much better to be prepared now than to have to run around. Cool. Next slide, Dan. Thanks. Okay, great. So now we're going to have a look at a modern threat. This is a piece of malware that we've discovered. It's been around for a little while now. It's still doing the rounds. Actually, we have a white paper on our website which will take you through this in much more detail than I'm going to do right now, because I don't want to ramble on too long. Great, thanks, Dan. Next slide. So this piece of malware is called MyKings. Now it's believed to originate from China, and essentially it's a cryptojacking malware. It will use your system resources, your machine, to mine cryptocurrency for the threat actor's own wallets to make them rich. Next slide, Dan. Now when it attacks, when it runs multiple layers. It is a multi-layered piece of malware, and pretty much every modern threat out there today is a multiple layered threat. It's very rare that you see just a single executable anymore. Most threats are using multiple different types of methods, multiple attack vectors, even in the same attack, to compromise a machine and to take hold of and get a foothold in that machine, and then later on in that network. So with a multi-layered attack, you obviously need a multi-layered defense. Next slide, then. So we start off with the root cause, which is a PowerShell script. The PowerShell script is actually an obfuscated PowerShell script. It uses a base64 encoded command, and you can see it on there. The PowerShell script actually is say the root cause of it. Its job, though, is to go off and download and execute lots of additional components. Next slide. The first one being the for-share backdoor. Now, this is a Trojan, and it gives the attacker a remote tunnel back to that device should they require it. But in the case of MyKings, its main job really is to actually go off and download even more components from various IPs and URLs, and you can see them there. Don't go to those. I think they're all taken down now, but yeah, don't go there. Next slide, Dan. Part of that, the for-share downloader actually then downloads a WinRAR self-extracting archive. And that archive contains some batch scripts and some VBS scripts, and then executes them. Again, very simple, but by having a modular system like this, it allows the threat actors to actually change stuff out much more readily, much more quickly. If they need to make a change, they can change this, the C3.bat file very quickly and make it essentially a completely different piece of malware. Now, the C3.bat file, its job is actually to spawn lots of other processes. Most of those actually are using their net command, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Net stop and the service, net start service, net delete. All these things are trying to, in the case of MyKings, trying to stop antivirus software, but also stop other components on there, maybe the Windows update systems, maybe other updating components as well. And it does spawn an awful lot of these, all trying to go off just literally from this batch file to try and kill a load of things, stop a load of services, and make the system less secure. It also goes off and downloads even more components, and it cleans itself up. One of the other things that the PowerShell downloads is the bootkit installer. And the bootkit installs into the VBR, or the IPL, as it's shown on my side here, the initial program loader, or volume boot record, to use sort of older terminology. This means that the malware is actually executed when the system boots, and I've talked about secure boot already. Secure boot would prevent this sort of stuff from happening, because that infected loader, that infected compromised loader cannot load from there. We of course also have mitigations against that to prevent that from happening as well. Again, it's all about layers. The more layers you have, the better your probability of stopping an attack like this from taking root. Next slide then. Another thing that PowerShell downloads is a DNS changer. As the name implies, this changes the DNS of the machine. It actually changes it to a Chinese ISP. This is believed to be allowed, sort of allow it to get past various filters. You know, there are some vendors out there, security vendors, that simply change your DNS and route all your requests through them. It's not the best way of doing security, really, because it's very easily bypassed, as shown here, frankly. Now, the DNS changer not only makes those DNS changes, but it also goes off and downloads even more components. If you can hit next for me, Dan. Thanks. And one of those is the SQL brute forcer, or SQL brute forcer, depending on how you want to pronounce this. The SQL brute forcer, as its name kind of implies, it tries to break into Microsoft SQL. So if you have Microsoft SQL running on that machine, it will break into that. It's using brute force passwords. It will get in. It will then create some scripts actually inside of SQL in order to make it download the malware. So at this point, SQL will then be downloading the MyKings malware for you as well. It's part of its persistence in order to make other components work for it and help maintain its presence on that machine and ultimately in the network. That tool also then harks out to the network and tries to spread further as well. MyKings then finally goes on to use the Eternal Blue exploit from the NSA leaks in 2017 to then spread to other unprotected machines within the network. It has been seen to use other exploits as well, but Eternal Blue was the most prevalent one of the time. With that kicks off a whole nother batch of PowerShell scripts dropping on machines, downloading the foreshare, downloading the WinRAR, downloading these batch files and everything else, and then mining more and more money for the bad guys. At some points, they're making quite a few £1,000s a day just from harvesting other people's machines and their resources. Thanks, Dan. Next slide. I need to hurry up a little bit, don't I? So the Sophos solution. We have various solutions that Dan alluded to at the beginning. And the first one is Intercept X for Advanced with EDR. Now, what this will give you is visibility within those networks. We've already talked about that many times already. I'm not going to keep repeating myself on that one too much, other than the importance of it. But it also provides you an awful lot of layers to protect against a malware infection or potential malware infection. We can see here through the middle of the diagram, we have some rather large arrows. These are essentially the procedural view of how malware tends to work. So there's a delivery mechanism through an infected email, 26% of the time, or infected website through 24% of the time, etc. There's an exploitation phase where they try to exploit the operating system or the software that you're running on there, or indeed any plugins maybe even to that software. There's an installation phase where they try to make themselves persistent, as we just saw with the MyKings, trying to make themselves persistent with the bootkit and the SQL changes and stuff as well. The fourth item here, command and control, where they call home to obtain more information, as per that foreshare Trojan that the MyKings malware uses as well. And then finally, the actions and objectives, where they do what they've been told to do. Send spam, mine your machine for cryptocurrencies, encrypt your files using a ransomware derivative on there, or many other things. There's plenty of other things that they can do, of course. Stealing your files, uploading them somewhere, maybe to the Mega or Dropbox or something. Now, spinning off all these other different layers within our endpoint, and there are lots of them. I'm not going to go through them right now. If you want to learn more about these, please contact Chris at ITHealth and ourselves, and we can help you go into as much detail as you wish to on every one of these points here. Thanks, Dan. Next slide. The other thing we have is the XG firewall. And don't be put off by the word firewall. It doesn't have to be used as a firewall. It can be used as a security appliance alongside your existing firewalls, either using mirror ports or by bridging connections together. We do have plenty of examples of NHS customers using it in that way to help them harden their network and keep things even safer. Again, there's lots of layers in here. I'm not going to go through these, but as you can see, there are a lot of them. Dealing obviously mostly with delivery, as that's where a network appliance would generally sit. One of the key aspects that we can give for this is the ultimate combination of combining the firewall with the endpoint, or indeed server solutions, and that's what we call synchronized security. Now, with synchronized security and the security heartbeat that talks from the endpoints to the servers, the endpoints to the firewalls and the servers to the firewalls, we're able to have more insight into the traffic. Again, more information, less unknowns. That allows our systems to work together so that if one device finds something is wrong, it can warn the firewall, or the firewall can warn the endpoints, or the firewall can tell the other machines in the network, this machine over here has been compromised. Do not talk to it. Do not talk to this one. Do not receive any traffic. Do not send any traffic to that server, to that endpoint. It is known compromised. It is known bad. These systems work intelligently together in a fully automated way. There's nothing for you to do. You don't have to sit there late on a Sunday evening hitting buttons. If we notice something's wrong, we can react to it for you. Shown here, we have the lateral movement protection. The endpoint on the right-hand side in the middle, it's gone red and bad. The firewall can automatically tell all the other devices, do not talk to it. They're even on that same LAN segment, even on that same subnet, even if they're going through that same switch, and they would otherwise go straight to it. We can tell the other devices to shy away from it and do not accept traffic. As shown in that picture there, the firewall, the XG series appliance, can be put in line with an existing firewall. It doesn't have to replace the main one. It can just go alongside or behind. Thanks, Dan. Next slide. And to show that as well in a bit more detail, we have the top line here. We have the firewall replacement, obviously ripping out the core firewall maybe in a GP surgery or something, and putting an XG there. That then gives you various connectivity options, as well as the ability to use a synchronized security feature, maintaining additional security for the devices within that network, maintaining additional separation and segregation for those devices. The firewall can be deployed in line, just with a simple bridge pair, bridging two or more ports together to allow traffic to traverse through us to your existing firewall. We can filter it, we can secure it, and make sure that it's done properly. Make sure you've got those levels of separation in there, those levels of isolation, and the information you need to be able to combat threats. And then finally, discover mode at the bottom, where we can actually come off a mirror port off your core switches, and we can digest that data for you to give you useful insights, useful information around your network and what's going on. But we can still enforce that client isolation. So if a machine does go wrong, our firewall can still tell other devices, do not talk to it, do not go near. Now this is all controlled through our central portal called Sophos Central, which is a hosted management platform. It controls all of our solutions, from the endpoint and servers, through MDM, through the firewall, through our user education tools and cloud monitoring software as well. Again, if you want to see more details around this, if you're already a customer of it and want to dive into any other features that are in here, of which there are lots, again, please reach out for us. And then finally, I've got some handy resources to share with you as well from the slides here. The NCSC have a great collection of stuff. I've already mentioned a fair few of them. Do read through them. Do try and follow their guidance. It is really very good guidance to help you secure your machines and make the best of the solutions that are available to you natively in the operating systems, as well as with other tools such as ourselves. And the NHS Digital, of course, the DSPT toolkit.nhs.uk. I'm sure you've all got links to that. I'm sure you're all using it today. But if not, make sure you are, maybe ask some colleagues in other trusts what they're doing with their profiles as well. And then finally, we have, of course, ITHealth and Sophos. For ourselves, sophos.com/NHS, we've got some very insightful white papers and articles, as well as references from other trusts out there that are using our software to help them secure their systems, be they unprotectable machines like Windows 7, like 2008 R2s, or be they the normal, everyday Windows 10s and 2019s. Thank you. Now I'm going to pass back across to Chris to finish up with some stuff from ITHealth.
Thanks, Andy. That was really useful. Some really fascinating insights into the threat landscape and how we can, start to mitigate against some of those. And thanks everybody for kind of staying with that. I just wanted to close out with a few brief slides around the solution, which some of you have, some of you may be aware of. We call our assurance dashboard, and really I wanted to try to tie in with what the guys have been talking about with regards to how to protect these important software operating systems and make sure that your network is secure. If you can move the slides on for me, Dan, that'd be great. Thank you. And this is a slide that some of you may have seen before in terms of what we call a spaghetti mess of applications, hardware, relationships that exist on your network today. This is a real example that we shared with us some time ago. And effectively, it's really kind of laying out how the land lies in terms of what's going on your networks and what a mess it can be and how you get to a point where you can start to understand what you've got. And some of you, or many of you, will have multiple tools which are doing a fantastic job in looking at those applications and hardware and reporting back on them in terms of whether it be the software itself or how it's patched or what the vulnerabilities look like, etc., etc. Some of you may be using other tools, some of you may be using spreadsheets as an example. And if you can move on, please. Thanks, Dan. And really what we're trying to address here in all of this content is what are these challenges and what is the things that we're facing on a day-to-day basis on our local networks. And really the key one for us is visibility and transparency. If you've got visibility and transparency, then a lot of what we've talked about starts to become clear and you can start to understand what your risk is and how you mitigate that risk, how you then deal with it. We know that vulnerabilities are hard to track and can be difficult to understand. They seem to come at us in a vast array, whether it be vulnerabilities that are global vulnerabilities or vulnerabilities that are coming out of things like care certs or cyber alerts that we get now. Standards reporting out into the outside world, whether it be DSPT or Cyber Essentials, can be difficult sometimes. You get to that content, can also be labour intensive, and reporting on that can take time. And we also know that you're all busy. Everybody's busy. You've got a lot to do, even more so in current times. And it's trying to get the focus in on the things that need to be dealt with quickly, especially when we know that things are becoming more frequent in the cyber threat landscape, and identifying those risks are becoming more and more time consuming. So next slide, please. So what we've attempted to do, and this solution now is in almost 100 trusts, is bring all of this together, bring visibility together, bring vulnerabilities together, because if we can give you a view on your world which is truthful and you can trust, it means you can therefore then begin to understand what that threat looks like and how you then mitigate against it and what tests you take. So we've been looking at operating systems that are unsupported, Windows 7, where are they? Where are those unsupported OSs? Where are those servers? What patch levels are they at, etc., etc. And therefore, then how do we start to bring those mitigations in? And it was interesting, one of those slides that Andy did share said that 50% of the problems related to this issue were related to local software, hardware, and related things. So knowing your network is key, and this is really what we're doing with the dashboard. And last slide, I think, please. And in terms of benefits, what we're hoping to do with, certainly those trusts that are using the dashboard now are seeing is that they have focus on the problem. They have focus on the issue. They can start to bring resources in a proactive way around those. And our direction of travel in this is to give you effectively a planning tool. Know the problem, know where to apply resources. Rather than looking at retrospectively at what has happened, let's look proactively into into what could happen and help you focus your attention in on those things to give you that thing, and at the same time give you that global, truthful view of your network, whether you are a desktop person or infrastructure person, a server person, a cyber person, a management layer executive, whatever, and in addition provide you with a monthly report, which is kind of that exec summary. And some of these benefits are quite clear to us in terms of mitigation, simplification, streamlining. Reporting is key. Bridging silos, I said, between teams, saving time and resources is important, and then that knowing you've got that 24/7, 365 at a glance desktop view, which is there. And I say we're over 80 trust now, and we're actually citywide in some places as well, as some of you will know. So, and I think last slide, please. So I just want to say in summation, thanks everybody for joining. I've not seen any questions come up, so if anything does come up in the last few minutes we've got, then please fire them into the question box. If not, please make contact with us outside of this. You will receive an email from us with some links to content. We have recorded the session, so you'll be able to share that or review that again if you want to. And again, I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining today. Thank you to Dan and Andy for some great content there. And thank you to colleagues around you who've helped put this together. As I say, as you leave today's seminar, there will be a short survey if you wouldn't mind completing that for us, because it does help us to continue to improve on these things. But if there are no more questions, I can't see anybody any questions there. We'll bring it to a close, and hope you have a rest of a good day. Thanks everybody. Cheers now. Bye bye.
Perfect. I don't think I can see any questions, but thanks for your time, everyone.